The brutal medieval weapons history forgot. Imagine standing on a medieval battlefield. What weapons come to mind? The noble knight's sword. These aren't just weapons, they're nightmares forged in iron and steel. The archer's bow. Perhaps a battle axe or mace. Now imagine something far more sinister. Weapons designed not just to kill, but to maim, torture, and instill absolute terror. Weapons so horrific that history itself seems to have deliberately forgotten them. I am about to take you on a journey through the darkest corners of medieval warfare, revealing brutal instruments of death that most history books conveniently leave out. What you're about to discover will forever change how you view the so-called chivalrous Middle Ages. These weren't the weapons celebrated in tales and songs. These were the brutal tools that actually won wars. Specialized weapons designed to hook around shields, pull riders from horses, crush skulls through helmets, or inflict wounds that would fester and kill slowly. The sight of specialized torture devices converted to battlefield use could break enemy morale before a single blow was struck. Knights didn't seek fair fights. They sought victory at any cost. The bloody reality of medieval warfare. German principalities, Italian city-states, English kingdoms, and Eastern European territories all developed their own specialized instruments of war, many of which remain obscure even to serious historians. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're windows into humanity's darkest capabilities. Their workshops were places of innovation where the boundaries of what metal could do were constantly pushed forward. It was a brutal time where survival often depended on one's ability to inflict maximum damage on enemies. The constant arms race between protection and destruction led to some of history's most ingenious and terrifying weapons. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 10th century, was not the romantic era of noble knights and honorable combat that popular culture often portrays. As armor technology advanced, so too did the weapons designed to penetrate it. Working with primitive tools and fueled by the constant demands of warfare, these artisans created weapons that would make even modern soldiers shudder. In the smoky workshops of medieval Europe, blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen, they were engineers of death. The evolution of medieval weapons was driven by chivalry or honor. It was driven by necessity and the cold calculation of battlefield effectiveness. Consider this. While nobles commissioned beautiful, ornate swords as symbols of status, the common soldiers were wielding weapons designed with one purpose: to inflict maximum suffering. In the damp castles and fortresses across Europe, armories held collections of weapons that would shock modern sensibilities. The psychological aspect of medieval warfare cannot be overstated. Many weapons were designed not just to kill efficiently but to terrify opponents. What's particularly fascinating is how regional conflict spawned unique weapon designs. The blacksmiths who created these weapons were often considered almost magical in their communities. Their knowledge of metallurgy and mechanics, placing them in a category somewhere between craftsmen and sorcerers. As we prepare to examine these forgotten weapons in detail, remember that each represents countless lives lost in ways so horrific that chroniclers often chose not to record them. The forgotten arsenal, brutal weapons, history overlooked. Let me introduce you to the medieval weapons. That time forgot instruments so horrific that many historians gloss over them in favor of more noble armament. First, the Godendog, a Flemish invention, whose name ironically translates to good day. This brutal club featured a heavy wooden shaft topped with a massive metal spike. Imagine a long staff topped with a two-pronged metal fork designed specifically to capture knights by the neck. Once strapped, a rider could be pulled from his horse and dispatched at leisure. Unlike standard maces, this weapon featured dozens of sharp spikes attached to a central bow by short chains. This metal pair could be inserted into bodily orifices and then expanded using a screw mechanism, causing unimaginable pain and damage. Knights would threaten captured enemies with this device to extract information or rant. Medieval weaponsmiths weren't just creating tools for killing, they were designing instruments specifically to maximize suffering and psychological impact. These weren't weapons of necessity, they were weapons of terror. The mere sight of a pair of anguish was often enough to make prisoners cooperate immediately. When swung, the spiked balls would whip around unpredictably, wrapping around shields and striking from unexpected angles. Some featured multiple heads with different damage profiles, spikes for puncturing, blunt surfaces for crushing, and even serrated edges for tearing flesh. Others incorporated incendiary materials or were designed to break apart on impact, sending deadly shrapnel in all directions. These weapons were particularly favored in Eastern European conflicts, where their unpredictable nature made them effective against disciplined Western knights. The psychological effect of seeing this weapon in action was often enough to break enemy morale before combat even began. These weapons weren't designed for quick kills. They were created to humiliate and control. German principalities particularly favored these weapons, and specialized versions were even created for capturing high-value targets alive for ransom. Simple in design but devastating in execution, the Gottendog allowed infantry to puncture knights' armor with the spike, then used the club portion to deliver crushing blows. During the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302, Flemish militiamen used these weapons to devastating effect against French cavalry, proving that sometimes the most brutal weapons are also the most effective. Then there's the man-catcher, a pole weapon with a diabolical purpose. The bec de Corbin, or crow's beak, combined multiple killing methods in one terrifying package. This polearm featured a hammerhead for crushing armor, a back spike shaped like a crow's beak for puncturing, and a spear point for thrusting. The versatility made it particularly lethal. No matter how a knight was armored, the bec de Corbin offered a way through their defenses. Court records from 15th century France describe wounds from these weapons as unhealable by conventional medicine. Perhaps most disturbing was the holy water sprinkler, a mace with a darkly humorous name that belied its horrific function. The pair of anguish represents medieval cruelty at its most calculated. Though primarily a torture device, modified versions were used in combat. Finally, the specialized flails that went far beyond the simple ball and chain design most people recognize. What makes these weapons particularly disturbing isn't just their capacity for violence, but the deliberate engineering behind them. The psychological warfare, beyond physical damage. The true power of these forgotten medieval weapons extended far beyond their physical capabilities. They were instruments of psychological warfare, designed to break the enemy's spirit before breaking their body. Consider the battlefield psychology of facing an opponent wielding a holy water sprinkler. Knights were valuable, not just as warriors, but as potential sources of ransom. The man-catcher wasn't merely designed to remove a knight from his horse. It was created to capture high-value targets intact. Historical records from 14th century Germany document specialized units equipped with these devices, whose sole purpose was to capture enemy nobility. Its versatility meant that specialized formations could be created where soldiers worked in pairs. One to hook or disable an opponent, another to deliver the killing blow. Injuries inflicted by conventional weapons like swords often created clean cuts that medieval medicine could treat with some effectiveness. But the crushing, tearing damage caused by weapons like the Gottendog or specialized flails created wounds that were nearly impossible to treat with medieval medical knowledge. The forgotten weapons we've discussed were just tools of violence. They were carefully engineered instruments of terror, designed to exploit human psychology in ways that remain disturbing, even by modern standards. Soldiers knew this distinction, and the fear of suffering a bad wound, one that would lead to slow, agonizing death rather than a quick one, became a powerful psychological factor on medieval battlefields. This cooperative fighting style represented a significant evolution from individual combat, creating a psychological advantage through coordinated action that many opponents found disorienting and terrifying. Similarly, European chronicles note the psychological impact of facing unfamiliar Eastern weapons. This fear of the unknown became a significant tactical advantage, with armies sometimes displaying their most unusual weapons prominently before battle to maximize intimidation. One account describes how a single captured duke yielded enough ransom to fund an entire campaign season. The unpredictable whipping motion of its spiked chains created a terrifying visual spectacle. Soldiers reported hearing a distinctive whistling sound as these weapons cut through the air, a sound that became associated with imminent, gruesome injury. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe entire formations, breaking ranks at the mere sight of specialized flail units advancing toward them. The psychological advantage came not just from the weapons themselves, but from how they appended the established order of warfare. Knights, trained from childhood to believe in their martial superiority, suddenly faced peasants with simple yet devastatingly effective weapons that rendered their expensive armor and training nearly useless. The resulting French rout wasn't just a military defeat, it was an existential crisis for the entire chivalric system. These weapons also served a strategic purpose in medieval warfare's complex social hierarchy. The psychological impact extended to the wielders as well. Soldiers armed with these brutal weapons were often segregated from regular troops, developing their own subcultures and rituals. They became feared not just by enemies, but sometimes by their own comrades. In some mercenary companies, those who specialized in these weapons wore distinctive markings or armor modifications, creating an early form of psychological operations designed to amplify terror. In the Battle of Courtrai, Flemish militia, armed with Godendags, faced French knights, considered the finest heavy cavalry in Europe. The Bec de Corbin exemplifies how these weapons influenced battlefield tactics. Perhaps most disturbing was how these weapons influenced the treatment of the wounded. Historical accounts from the Crusades describe Muslim defenders being particularly terrified of European flails and morning stars, weapons that had no equivalent in their military tradition. These psychological dimensions of medieval warfare reveal a sophistication that goes far beyond the stereotype of brute force combat. The Dark Legacy. What these forgotten weapons teach us. As we conclude our journey through the shadows of medieval warfare, we're left with uncomfortable truths about human ingenuity and cruelty. These forgotten weapons represent more than just historical curiosities. They offer profound insights into our past and perhaps warnings for our future. The brutal weapons we've explored reveal a medieval world far removed from the romanticized version often portrayed in popular culture. There was nothing noble about the Pair of Anguish or the Man-Catcher. Yet modern warfare, with its long-range missiles and drone strikes, may simply represent a different kind of brutality. One where the psychological connection between killer and killed has been severed by distance and technology. Have we truly progressed, or merely changed the nature of our violence? The same human capacity for innovation that would eventually produce medicine, art, and technology was first directed toward increasingly efficient ways to harm others. This duality of human potential to create or destroy remains one of our species' defining characteristics. For every noble knight's sword, there existed a dozen brutal, pragmatic weapons designed not for honor, but for the grim business of killing. The weapons that history forgot tell us as much about ourselves as they do about our ancestors. And in their brutal efficiency, they pose a question that each generation must answer anew. Will we direct our creativity toward destruction or creation? The choice, as it has always been, remains ours. In acknowledging this darker history, we gain a more honest understanding of our past, and perhaps a clear vision of human nature itself. The specialized tools for capturing knights alive weren't born from mercy, but from cold economic calculation. A nobleman was worth more in ransom than dead. Each rusted Bec de Corbin or fragmented flail recovered from battlefields across Europe adds another piece to this complex puzzle. The full picture that emerges is one of sophisticated tactical thinking and psychological warfare that rivals anything in the modern military playbook. Even in the midst of brutality, class distinctions remain paramount. The battlefield was merely an extension of medieval society's rigid hierarchy, where a person's worth was determined by birth and status. These were instruments designed specifically to maximize suffering, a testament to humanity's darkest impulses. Yet understanding this reality gives us a more complete picture of history, one that acknowledges both human achievement and human depravity. What's particularly striking is how these weapons reflect the social structures of their time. These weapons also challenge our assumptions about technological progress. We often imagine that military technology advances in a linear fashion, becoming more civilized over time. Perhaps most importantly, these forgotten weapons remind us of the importance of comprehensive historical education. When we sanitize history, removing its most disturbing elements, we lose valuable lessons. The holy water sprinkler and Godendug weren't anomalies. They were logical extensions of their cultural context. By understanding the conditions that gave rise to such weapons, we gain insights into how societies can descend into extreme violence, knowledge that remains relevant in our own time. The creativity that medieval weaponsmiths applied to the problem of killing and maiming is both impressive and disturbing, as archaeological discoveries continue to unearth more of these forgotten weapons. Historians are constantly revising our understanding of medieval warfare. So the next time you visit a castle or museum and see the gleaming swords and armor on display, remember that these represent only part of the story. The medieval period wasn't simply a primitive prelude to our more enlightened age. It was a time of remarkable innovation, much of it directed toward warfare.